Welcome to the You Are a Philanthropist podcast. Today we're talking with Tim Wilson. Tim is the Prospect Management Manager at Weber State University in Utah and founder and host of the web podcast series People in Fundraising.
You are the kind of person who wants to improve the lives of others, but you need to take pride in your everyday actions. You Are a Philanthropist believes that every act of goodwill deserves to be recognized as philanthropy. Each individual action you take impacts another's life. Believe that what you do makes a difference. So call yourself a philanthropist and start a ripple effect of generosity that boomerangs back to you. Go to youareaphilanthropist.com/shop. Style your outside to match your inside. Choose a t-shirt, hoodie, or bag to show how much you love giving to others. That's youareaphilanthropist.com/shop.
Hey y'all, I just want to remind you that I need you to subscribe, rate, and review to this podcast. If you're enjoying it and want more conversations like this and want to help people get more involved with philanthropy, please subscribe, rate, and review. I want to thank you to the people who have already rated this podcast 5 stars. Please click to rate it 5 stars. And here is some awesome reviews. I love hearing the different stories from a variety of people's personalities. We all can contribute with the strengths we have in making the world a better place for all of us to live in. Here's another one. I really enjoy this podcast. It's encouraging to see that I don't have to be a multimillionaire who created a philanthropic foundation to impact people. It's my small gifts of my time and resources that add up. I am a philanthropist. And here's another. There are opportunities all around at an early age to remind us to look out for each other. It's a lifelong journey of seeing the opportunities and acting in them. Thanks for a great reminder. Listeners, please do me a favor, subscribe, rate, and review right now so more people can hear more from us and learn more about philanthropy.
Welcome to the You Are a Philanthropist podcast with Jen Klein, a certified fundraising executive and philanthropic entrepreneur. This show is dedicated to empowering and inspiring you to make a difference in your community and our world. Jen believes all acts of kindness matter, and this show is designed to help you take pride in your everyday actions of improving the lives of others and making a change in the world. Now, here's Jen.
Hi, Jen. Thank you for having me on the program today, and thank you for inviting me, and I'm glad that we connected on LinkedIn a while ago.
It's my pleasure. I am so excited to have you on as another podcaster. We have a lot of synergy between our podcasts as well. Could you tell me a little bit more about your podcast and your career and what you're up to these days?
Sure. I think maybe starting with my career and then segueing into the podcast, just kind of, in a linear way, how my mind works. So I've worked in prospect development full-time for just about 25 years and started out temping in the development office at Harvard Business School, and then a full-time junior prospect research analyst role opened up. I had really no idea about fundraising as a profession that felt like, I knew about annual fund calling when I was an undergrad and things like that. But I think the scope of fundraising roles, goals, things like that it was sort of a theoretical understanding, but getting in on the ground at HBS, Harvard Business School, was a real eye-opening experience as a young 20-year-old, well, not 20, but 22-year-old. And so the prospect research really fit with my sort of academic interests, skill set, personality. Certainly, I didn't at the time see myself being comfortable to go out and ask for money and the travel involved with that. So I've stayed right in prospect management research all this time and really enjoyed it. In terms of my career journey, I spent 18 years at Harvard Business School, 3.5 years in the healthcare philanthropy sector at the Intermountain Healthcare Foundation here in Salt Lake City, Utah. And now I've been at Weber State University in Ogden for about 18 months. So I didn't really set out to have that diverse employer experience where, private higher education, then healthcare, philanthropy, now public higher education. But it's been very beneficial for just my career, for my own sort of lifelong learning to have that diversity. I've worked with large teams at HBS and then a small team at Intermountain, managed staff there. And now I'm a one-man show at Weber State. So, again, like a richness of experience with teams and certainly a wide range of resources. So like, an abundance of riches at HBS. And then with healthcare philanthropy, there was a real push for me to focus more on professional development through AHP as opposed to APRA, which I was really familiar with APRA International, and then resources at Weber State, they're different as well. So that's been beneficial. And to say, what can I do with the constraints I have, whether that's the staff size or access to vendors, but also being able to build it up at Weber State. They have never had a prospect development person there before. So that was really appealing for me. So yeah, that's been my career. I've also really enjoyed giving back to the profession, and again, particularly to APRA International. So I've served on several regional boards, NEDRA and APRA Utah as president, board member of NEDRA, and then a few APRA International committees. That's given me just great exposure to thought leaders, colleagues, people that become friends. Certainly in the virtual climate, that's been much easier to hop on committee calls any time of the day, really. I mean, with the time zone differences and such, I just love that flexibility of scheduling that's come out through remote and hybrid work. And so, yeah, that's been my career. And then last year, I thought, well, I've got a full-time job, and my wife and I have 4 kids, so why not add something else to my plate? And getting back to, I mentioned earlier, I didn't think I had really the personality fit to do frontline work. I've felt that I may have been selling myself short in that way, and so both professionally and personally, just trying to. I'm naturally curious about lots of things, including people and what makes them tick. But it's sort of like making that initial connection to walk up to a stranger at a conference or potentially present at a conference. Those types of really extroverted avenues have not felt like my strong suit. But I just thought I'll challenge myself. I've had this idea to do a fundraising podcast for a number of years. I was going to have it be a book originally. But I thought, I love, again, how did someone get into the field? What makes them stay in fundraising? Have they had different roles? Have they gone from prospect research to frontline fundraising? Have they gone from frontline to donor relations? And how did they make that happen? Did they see an opportunity? Did they create the opportunity? Just those stories of the people in fundraising really appealed to me, and it's been such a fascinating topic for me. So that's the title of my webcast. I interviewed 40 people last year, so starting in March, and then I it's kind of like bankruptcy. The phrase is, it happened gradually and then suddenly someone goes bankrupt. And for me, gradually became suddenly, where this podcast, People in Fundraising, was taking up a lot of my free time. And you may experience this too, Jen, and I'd love to maybe chat with you about it, either here or offline. But a lot of the logistical elements, the coordinating of getting guests, reaching out, tapping your network, then scheduling an interview, sending the questions, all the marketing, uploading the video, all that stuff that as a one-man show in the podcast as well was like, my goodness, like what have I taken on? And you're nodding your head. So what can you relate to about that?
Well, I am a mother, I am a fundraiser, and I am a podcaster and businesswoman. So I totally know where you're coming from. And over a period of time since I started my podcast, there's been times where I needed to take a break, just like you're doing. And, particularly in the summer, when schedules are a little different with vacation and children's activities. So I have taken a couple breaks from publishing weekly, and now I'm kind of have more of a schedule of twice a month, which is a better balance for me. I know my listeners love this podcast, and I really want to be a resource for them for celebrating nonprofit work, just like you. So it is a very rewarding work, very important. And like you, I really resonated with, you just had this passion, something in you that said, I needed to do this. And that's really what these conversations are about, is knowing there's something inside of you that wants to do something greater, and knowing that at some point you're going to need to honor that and listen to it and go for it. It is so rewarding, like you said, but there is a balance with all the things that we have on our plates.
Yeah, absolutely. And I may adopt your model of twice a month of posting once I return. I've got about 10 interviews that I've done since February, and I'm just telling my guests now it'll be posted sometime this spring. I used to end each interview saying, on this specific date is when you can see Jen's interview. But I think allowing that flexibility, as you talk about, is critical when you have lots of other commitments that you've taken on. And particularly, I think parenthood, my oldest is just turned 16. So, it's like trying to step back, be more present, for her and to support the rest of our family as well. So.
Absolutely. Yes. And I'm writing a book, and one of the chapters talked about caregiving, because care to your family, to, loved ones, is a part of philanthropy, in my opinion, because it is giving back. It's giving of yourself, your energy, your passion, your resources. So I do see so much value and commend you on parenting for wonderful.
Yeah, thank you. And I just want to share one thing. Like I belong to a church, and one of our former leaders once said that no success can compensate for failure in the home. And I really have appreciated that sentiment. And not that anything I was pursuing with the podcast or my day job is leading to failure, but it just was like, a wake-up call to rebalance. And and people that I've talked to, lined them up to be guests, and then I've said, hey, I've got to push pause for a little bit. They've been very supportive, and that's very meaningful as well.
Absolutely. And you mentioned church, and one of the scriptures that is important to me is love your neighbor as you love yourself. And so when you give to others, you need to give an equal measure to yourself. So I think there's a balance, like we're talking about, and a necessity to take care of yourself in order to give back.
Yeah, absolutely. So true. So true. And I think it's easy to lose sight of your own needs. Like I've gone on your website and you've got merchandise and you're writing a book and you're doing these interviews, which are phenomenal. And I think, as an outsider listening in or visiting the website, I think, oh man, like this is rich. Like, look what Jen is doing. And it can be hard from that outsider perspective to understand without talking to you just how much energy, time, commitment you're dedicating. So I commend you as well for taking steps back as you've had to over the years, and I think being in this inner circle of fundraising podcasters, supporting each other as we do this is important.
That's wonderful. Yes, because nonprofit employees tend to be very generous with their time and passion. And I know one of my prior guests, Haley Cooper, talks about the importance of giving to yourself and balancing that gift that you're giving to others with giving to yourself.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And it just was kind of serendipitous. So I stopped at 40 interviews posted. I didn't plan to break it up in seasons like Catherine Van Sickle, Development Debrief. She has a very deliberate set number of episodes per season, and that's awesome. Haley as well. I've been on a presentation with her and Jay Frost. Jay Frost has a different cycle of how long or how frequent he posts. So for me, I'm like, okay, 40, this is good. This just feels good. And it just happens to be one of my favorite U2 songs, which is based on an Old Testament verse. So there was just some nice synergy. It was almost like the universe message of like, let's just wrap it up at 40 for now and and then revisit. So I just wanted to add that.
Absolutely. Everything happens for a reason, I believe. And I love that you had that commitment to make 40 episodes and share the stories of our peers and who, like you and I, love the fundraising space, love to our charities to donate to, as both our those that we volunteer for as well as work for. So I am looking forward to a new season of yours.
Thank you.
And, I love the work you're doing.
Well, I appreciate that, Jen. Thank you.
And I want to thank you for your kind words about what I'm doing. I think it's easy to fall into the trap of, because we're also marketing what we're doing, you kind of have to be on social media and you have to know what other people are doing. And find myself a little bit more involved in social media than I used to be to kind of see what others are doing. And I do, fall into that trap of thinking that I'm not doing enough. And
yeah,
in reality, I am managing a delicate balance. As we talked about, parenting is the most important work that I do. And nothing that I do can compare to that important work I do at home.
Absolutely. Yeah. Spot on, Jen.
I love that we're in agreement on so much. And we're just met each other. So friends for a long time.
Totally.
So some of the questions I like to ask my guests is, what areas do they enjoy about their work, and where did they get their inspiration to do this work?
Yeah, the inspiration to do the work, I think, for me, it's the satisfaction of knowing that even from a distance, I'm helping through the day-to-day work I do to change someone's life. And it could be really loose, a connection to that. But whether that was in healthcare philanthropy, identifying prospects that maybe good major gift donors, or they have an interest in medical research or specific types of instruments that have saved their life or a loved one's life, and sharing that research with the frontline fundraisers. That was really meaningful. And I worked at Intermountain Healthcare during the beginning of the pandemic, and we launched a program to have just average people non-surgical masks. And it was a huge community effort. Utah is just a very generous state to live in. There's a heavy Mormon influence here, very community, family centric. And people really rallied to that effort. And I know that communities did across the world as well. I can only speak to that experience of working at home, supporting healthcare philanthropy in this hourly changing pandemic, and then coming up to my kitchen, and my wife and our two daughters are helping to put cloth face covering kits together. And they would then be brought to our church and then distributed from there. So things like that really, those experiences really helped me feel connected to the mission. Not the frontline fundraising, again, where I can ask someone for money and know that that's going to go to a specific student that will change their educational trajectory for the better. That must be incredibly fulfilling as well. So I take satisfaction in knowing that I'm a piece of that process, even if I'm not front and center in making that happen, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it really does. Prospect research is so important for our listeners who don't know. It allows frontline fundraisers to understand what types of things prospects and donors might be interested in when they are thinking about giving to the school, in our case, the school or healthcare or other, whatever nonprofit you're working for.
Yeah.
I love how you mention that you're part of a community and a team, and now you're doing a solo kind of prospect research work, which I commend you, because I imagine that job is very big. But like you said, you're changing lives of the nonprofit you're advocating for, like in our case, a school. You're changing the children's lives, but the lives of the donors are being transformed too. And there's so much power and excitement in getting involved in a charity. And that's really, what our podcasts are about, is the exciting ways that people can feel more excited about giving back to nonprofits.
That's well said. And Jen, that reminds me of a podcast interview I did last fall with a man named Jimmy Martello at Intermountain Healthcare Foundation. Jimmy and I worked together for about 2 years at Intermountain, and I really admire him as a leader. And I learned a lot from him about how to partner with frontline fundraisers. So I know it was relatively brief period that we worked together, but I really grew to admire him as a professional and as a person. And we can relate because he also moved his family from a major metro area to Utah, just as my family had done a few years earlier. And Jimmy, in my podcast interview with him, talked about that, about the incredible sort of privilege it is to invite a donor to give to a program. And how he shared one story in particular that was really moving, just how that invitation to support a major initiative at Intermountain Healthcare was met by the donor and their family, two parents and their young children, with just gratitude that they were able to give back. They had suffered a tremendous loss, but they in time they could see that what could they possibly make good out of that. And so to be invited to support, and this was like a 7 or 8 figure gift, to make a sizable commitment so that other families down the road may not experience such a tragedy themselves. And Jimmy just talked really eloquently about that. And from his perspective, like, how moving it was to open the door for this family that may have been, I don't remember all the details, but they may have been looking at that point to say, what can we do now? And changing their lives, changing his life. And, for whoever heard that conversation, hopefully that resonated for listeners as well.
I love that. In giving, you receive.
Yes.
That's the
absolutely.
Good book. Yeah. So
yeah.
I can tell that you get a lot of enjoyment about the ins and outs and the day-to-day and of your work and the overall teamwork atmosphere that you have at your institutions that you've worked for.
Yeah, thank you. I think just growing older, growing wiser. I think when I was early in my career, you're learning a lot, and sometimes it's easy to just go with the flow and be regarded as back office and, a junior analyst in the back office. But I think, both personally and professionally, developing a voice and saying, I've got an opinion on this and I would just like to share it. That takes time, and for some it goes faster than others. But through that, I've been able to really develop some great working relationships, and quite a few that have turned into, friends as well, friends at work and then outside of work. And that was one of my few regrets about leaving Intermountain Healthcare, was that I had gotten to a point where in my career where, there were about 80-ish people on the team throughout the state of Utah. And I knew that I had worked to earn their trust. And in many cases, that working relationship had developed into like a nice personal connection too. And so losing those work friends when I left, it was hard. It's not a regret so much as it is like, sorry to see it come to an end, and it'll be different. But also just learning from that experience and just doing it again. Like you're new at a job, and how do you form relationships of trust with the people you support, and you're analyzing their portfolio, helping to build it, churn it. And I think it's important to get outside of your desk, get beyond your spreadsheets, and try to develop a harmonious relationship where they're trusting you, they're trusting the narrative of what you're seeing in their portfolio, any trends. I think APRA Carolinas put out this newsletter. I'm pretty sure it was Jennifer Vincent who I had on as a guest. And they recently published this about just how, in prospect development, how to foster those relationships with the frontline staff. And I thought it was a really insightful document. And again, another testament to just the great generosity that is in the APRA international community.
I love what you say about being more junior in your career and getting involved in the day-to-day and not maybe seeing the big picture. When I became a mother, I had been in fundraising for about 10 years. And I remember, I write about it in my book. I remember being at my desk and being very tired because I had just, had a baby and had to have a private office so I could pump for my baby. And he wasn't sleeping through the night. And I was just in a space where I was like, what am I doing and why am I doing this? And no one is like commending me. I'm not getting any special accolades. And for some reason, something that made me feel good was saying, okay, wait a minute. All this time I've put into these charities I've worked for really make a difference. And I decided I was going to call myself a philanthropist.
Awesome.
I was not going to wait until I gave millions of dollars, thousands of dollars. I was just going to say, you know what? My time, my passion, my energy is what defines philanthropy for me. And I am a philanthropist. And that's how this podcast was generated. You are a philanthropist. My podcast guests can be philanthropists. And how exciting it is to give yourself that gift of acknowledgement for the work that we can do and make a difference in the world.
Absolutely. I love that. I love the idea that finding the ways and the various ways that you are a philanthropist and owning that title is so great. That's just awesome.
Thank you, Tim.
Yeah.
It was one of those things where I had to acknowledge it, put it on social media, tell, all my connections about it. And it was the genesis of what I do now.
That's so cool.
I'm curious what your advice would be for our listeners who maybe hear a little voice inside them that say they should do something outside of themselves. What your recommendation would be for how they can get started?
Yeah, getting started as a philanthropist is how I'm hearing that question. And
Absolutely.
yeah, so I would say, and you asked earlier, Jen, about inspirations. And I think that's an important piece of starting to develop your own sense of philanthropy. And so for me, if I can start there with inspirations, I mean, I don't have one particular source, but I think of a few elementary school teachers, George Mitchell and Jenny Frost. I wrote these down in preparation for today, like just instilling a love of learning, but also connecting with me and with other kids at those very fundamental early ages. I think that is why I have been so drawn to education as a career. And education generally is where my personal philanthropy goes as well. And so, that goes back almost 40 years to have, those seeds planted to realize that, these teachers aren't just doing a job. They really cared about each student. And so, I would look for whether it's people or institutions that inspire you as part of this sort of soul searching to develop who you are as a philanthropist. And then from there, I wrote down just, make an inventory of your personal values. So is it animal welfare? Is it LGBTQ plus causes? Is it environment, politics, your alma mater? And I think doing that sort of introspection, that inventory can be really helpful and deliberate. It's not just like, I'm going to, give X amount of money because I saw an ad on Facebook or something. That's also fine too. But I think long-lasting identity as a philanthropist has to go deeper than that to get at your question. And I think that is the substance of what you've been doing with identifying yourself as a philanthropist, creating your podcast, writing a book, reaching out to other people. Just all of those concrete, deliberate steps is awesome. And so I think for someone starting out, it is like, what are my passions? What are my values? What are my interests? And then from there, do the homework to identify organizations that align with your values. But also know that your values and interests will change over time. You may be at a point in life where you can give more money or you can give more time. But also on the other side, you may become disenchanted with, perhaps your faith community. Maybe your partner's alma mater does a better job stewarding your gifts than your alma mater does. Maybe there's a new leadership change at a favorite charity and you see it going in a direction that you don't support. So circumstances change and your interests, your commitments, what you can give will also alter. And so I think just being flexible to understand that this is a process. And one thing that's been personally challenging for me is working in philanthropy and seeing the difference that charitable giving can make, even at small amounts, and wanting to do more, wishing I had more resources of time, of money, of talent to do more. And I think the internal wrestle I've had wearing those hats of working at a nonprofit and having some causes that are meaningful to me and my family, but also like just life circumstances, like having a mortgage, needing put money away for retirement, all the stuff of life that planned or unplanned can really divert someone from being more of the philanthropist at that time of their life than they may wish. And that's, I'm not patting myself on the back. I'm just saying that I wish I could do more and try to get to a point of accepting my own limitations of time and money and such. So I hope that makes sense.
Absolutely. And I've said it before in my podcast, and you touched on it about following your values. And if all my podcast guests were to get in the room, we would never agree on, the best way to live your life. But what we would agree on is the importance of getting involved in a way that's meaningful to you. And like you said, soul searching and figure out, what your part of your identity is and what's important to you. And I just believe that as long as we're all following what we're passionate about, it'll all work out.
Yes.
Just as long as it, like Jesus said, do no harm. Just as long as we're just doing good work, it'll all work out. And I'm so excited to hear about your passion for philanthropy, for interviewing people in the philanthropic space, and kind of the overall arc of what I want to get at is in my interview, my guests, is this very big question called, what's your vision for a better world?
The first answer that came to my mind was from the late Senator Robert F. Kennedy. And he gave this Day of Affirmation address in South Africa, which was under apartheid at the time, 2 years to the day before he was assassinated when he was running for president in 1968. So 1966, his answer gets, in my mind, at my ideal vision of a better world. And Robert F. Kennedy said, and I'm quoting, and it's a direct quote, but just know that when he says man, I'm envisioning, a man, a woman, people. Each time a man stands up for an ideal or acts to improve the lot of others or strikes out against injustice, he sends forth a tiny ripple of hope. And crossing each other from a million different centers of energy and daring, those ripples build a current which can sweep down the mightiest walls of oppression and resistance. And for me, that gets at the essence of the work that we can do as philanthropists. And the message that you just shared, from Jesus, do no harm. And as a person of faith myself, I can see the connection between sending forth ripples of hope and faith as well. And RFK was also a very strong person of faith. And I also admire his courage to have given that address in South Africa. At that time, knowing just the strong undercurrent of animosity between the minority white rulers and the majority Native African populations. When he talks about injustice and oppression, he was looking at people who were causing injustice and oppression in that audience, in the South African society. So I think, again, getting back to what I said a moment ago about just trying to be settled with the limitations of my own time, treasure, talent, those are tiny ripples that I can do. Maybe it's tiny ripples that you can do, Jen, but just the reach that we can have. And let's use our podcasts as examples of ripples. That in my mind, that's a tiny ripple because I know generally how many eyeballs, clicks are going each week. And it's okay, there's 40 reactions. Great. Tiny ripple. But through that ripple has morphed into your ripple and your network, and Jay Frost and Catherine Van Sickles and Clay Buck and Lynn Wester just put out a fundraising podcast. Fundraising is funny, and lots of other ones. All of these ripples that are time and treasure in the sense of we're sharing expertise. We're inviting, again, that invitation, we're inviting people onto the program to talk about their day-to-day jobs in fundraising, but also what motivates their own giving. And I think that's important. It's tiny, but just to bring it back to RFK's quote, it can do good. It can share knowledge. And I think it's both personally enjoyable, professionally rewarding, and it is a way of giving back that looks very different from employee payroll deduction or donating to my brother-in-law's cystic fibrosis charity. He has cystic fibrosis, and that was he's in his mid-40s now. And when he was born, that was a guaranteed fatal illness with a very short lifespan. And the advances that have been made through philanthropy with medical research, now people with CF can live far longer and have a far better quality of life.
Absolutely. Yeah. One of my guests, Jay Foss, said that I'm sowing seeds of hope. And I was taken aback by that compliment. I really considered it a high compliment, and I was grateful for that feedback. And I, for me, I'm just doing day-to-day stuff. I'm just talking to people. But if you look back at the overall big picture, wow, we're sowing seeds of hope. And the message is people can get involved with that. And that's just create, like you said, RFK said, create that ripple. And we are all part of that. Fundraisers, nonprofit leaders, volunteers, donors. And one of the statistics that I come back to is that 25% of Americans volunteer. I just think, what more can we do if more people volunteer? You talked about cystic fibrosis. I've on the podcast, I've talked about cancer research, and there's been so much movement in the medical field because of people's philanthropy. And there can be so much more. And that's why I asked this question, what your vision is for a better world, because I really see all of us being able to create that better world and being a part of the solution instead of complaining or getting discouraged. As you know, there's so much in the media that is overwhelming to look. And I know we all play a role in making the world a better place.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, another way to create those ripples of hope, the ripples of connection, and the crossing each other, as Robert F. Kennedy talked about. I have to give a shout out to Nathan Chappell and Brian Crimmins with their book, The Generosity Crisis, that came out last fall. And the subtitle is about radical connection, how radical connection can solve humanity's greatest crises. And I think it is like, I may have limited treasure, but I've got some time. And if I can connect with other people and see how we can put our heads together to help address local issues, and on up from there. That, to me, that book is a really helpful blueprint for, again, how to throw a pebble into the river and have the ripple effect go from there.
Yeah, and I'm going to make sure that I put in my show notes that are on my website some of these resources that you are recommending, such as that book and some of the podcasts we've spoken about. And I want to make sure reach out to you if they would like to, and what your how to reach out to you would be.
Yeah, great question. I don't have a very unusual name. So I'm hard to find on LinkedIn, but Tim Wilson, you can search LinkedIn, Tim Wilson, Weber State, Tim Wilson, People in Fundraising. My website is peopleinfundraising.com. And my Gmail for that initiative, the webcast, is peopleinfundraising@gmail.com.
Great. Good. And is there any charity you'd like to recommend for our listeners, or what you would recommend their action could be out of today?
There are several people in particular who have had on guests on People in Fundraising. And so some charities that I really admire the work they're doing, and it's not to take away from others that I've had on the program, but You Aspire, which works with young adults who are hoping to be first generation college students, going through the application process, the loan process, having a mentorship with college students and professionals. And I'm aware of that through Liza Brantley, who was on my podcast recently. Co-Africa, which builds schools in Malawi and a few other countries in sub-Saharan Africa. Village Book Builders, which does library construction in, again, some of those same sub-Saharan African countries, as well as Nepal and a few other locations. So those are some that come to mind that I found particularly moving, because again, it gets back to that educational piece that was rooted in me at a young age. The blessing of books, being able to read, being able to write and learn, and just the professional and personal growth that can come from something that I think a lot of Americans kind of take for granted, that, oh yeah, my town has a library, the kids' school has a library. Literacy, is generally very high, but these guests have enlightened me to just how on the ground around the world that is really not the case. So, and then I'd like to just make a plug for our profession, Jen, really quick. Fundraising, philanthropy is so meaningful to be involved in on both sides, day to day, and as a donor myself. And I think as my children get older and talking with student workers at Weber State, helping them to connect the dots to the work that the student workers are doing to impact potentially their friends or students in their classes on campus. And for my own children to see that there aren't very many deliberate paths out of high school or college into philanthropy, but to help them see that this is a really worthwhile, viable career option for them. And there's so many avenues that you can take once you become aware of philanthropy as a career, from alumni and events to prospect research, prospect management, frontline, marketing, data science. Like it really has exploded in career opportunities, while also being a great profession for people that are seeking deliberate work-life integration, to be able to not work 120 hours, 90 hours a week. So I think I've just benefited so much from our profession, from the people in it. People like Helen Brown with Research Pride Month. And the list goes on. And I think just to give a plug for philanthropy as a career is something I want to conclude with. So thank you.
Thank you for making me aware of those 3 nonprofits. I'll have those in the show notes. And I totally agree with you. This is a wonderful career path. And my listeners can reach out to both of us about that career path.
Absolutely.
And thank you so much for being on the show. Thank you for sharing your expertise. Thank you for sharing your passion. I really appreciate you being here.
Well, Jen, thank you so much. This was really a privilege. It was an honor for me to connect with you, and I'm cheering for you and hope that we can stay connected as fellow philanthropy podcasters.
Thank you, Tim. Have a great day.